On the morning of the 1st of April 2014, two young women decided to hike up to a popular tourist spot on the famous Pianista Trail. They were never seen alive again. Were their deaths the result of a tragic accident, or is there more to this mystery than meets the eye? What happened to the lost girls of Panama? It is said that every year in the month of April, in those first few weeks when the rains begin to fall over the rolling hills of the Green Mountain Highlands, that if you listen very closely, you will hear the echoed cries of Las Chicas Holandesas. It is nothing more than a local superstition, but for the people of a small town, nestled in a valley on the southern flank of the Continental Divide, those cries are both clear and ominous. The name of this small town is Boquete, and it belongs to a region of Panama, which has often been described as Little Switzerland. Its stunning pine forests, crystal clear lakes, and steep pastures are highly reminiscent of those Swiss landscapes, presenting an idyllic beauty which seems to reinforce Panama's very distinction of being Central America's safest nation. For how could anything bad happen in amongst all that splendour? At least that is the impression two young women had when they decided to visit this part of the world. Lisanna Fraun and Chris Kremers had saved up for months to take the holiday of a lifetime, a 6-week-long tour of the tropical paradise that is the Isthmus of Panama. Their stay was to be more than a simple vacation, as they planned to learn fluent Spanish and partake in volunteer work whilst they were there. As they boarded their flight on the 15th of March 2014, they no doubt did so with a feeling of excitement and anticipation, oblivious to the tragedy that awaited them. 2 weeks after landing at Tocumen International Airport, they would hike up into the heavenly cloud forests of the Green Mountain Highlands and never return. It would be months before any trace of them was found, and those traces would leave behind a truly haunting mystery which divides opinion to this day. Found in amongst their recovered belongings was a camera, which would provide a tiny window into their final days and leave us wondering, was it just a tragic accident, or did something far more sinister occur? It is not a question we can answer, but one we can at least elaborate upon. So let us go back to where it all started, with two young ladies who would later become known as Las Chicas Holandesas, the Dutch girls, Lisanna and Chris. Lisanna Fraun was born on the 24th of September 1991. Standing at 6 feet tall, she was described as athletic and adventurous. She was a keen member of her college volleyball team and had also dabbled in more extreme endeavours such as mountaineering and skydiving. Lisanna was also highly intelligent, having graduated from Saxion University with a degree in applied psychology. During her studies, she had developed a passion for amateur photography and had purchased a camera so that she could further indulge in her newfound hobby. As she had spent her whole life in Amersfoort, a municipality in Utrecht province of the Netherlands, she longed to travel the world, and it was through this desire that she befriended a young lady named Chris Kremers. Chris was born on the 9th of August 1992, and where Lisanna was a bit of an introvert, Chris was the exact opposite. Her outgoing nature was reflected in her love of the arts. She was an amateur actress and was on the verge of graduating in art history at the University of Utrecht. Friends and relatives spoke highly of her open, friendly nature and her great sense of humour. She was the kind of person that would do anything for anyone if they were in need. Chris met Lisanna whilst working part-time at a cafe in Amersfoort, and the pair bonded quickly due to their mutual interest in travelling. As friends, they soon became inseparable, and they planned to take a trip to Central America as soon as they had saved up enough money. But as they were penniless students, they had to cut their respective living costs, and so moved into an apartment together to help raise those funds. Within 6 months, they had booked their flight to Panama and kissed their families goodbye with an unspoken promise to return. Of course, they couldn't have known that they would break that promise just as completely as they would break the hearts of those they loved. They spent the first 2 weeks of their holiday sightseeing and taking part in leisure activities before moving on to the real purpose of their trip. As mentioned previously, they wanted to learn fluent Spanish and had applied for jobs in order to accomplish this quickly. It just so happened that a school in the small town of Boquete in West Panama had been looking for volunteer social workers to help out with the children's studies. This had all been arranged when they first booked the holiday, and they were under the impression that they were due to start their jobs at the school on the 31st of March 2014. However, when they arrived on this date, they were told rather bluntly that they were 7 days early. Now at a loose end, and with a whole week to kill, they decided to explore the Green Mountain Highlands and Volcan Baru National Park, which were just a stone's throw away from Boquete. They had it in mind to hike up to the Continental Divide, a point which separates the watersheds that flow into the Pacific Ocean to the south and Caribbean Sea to the north. At 1,850 meters above sea level, the Mirador, or lookout, sits right on the cusp of the Continental Divide and offers stunning 360-degree panoramas which stretch all the way to the horizon. The main route leading up to the Mirador is known as the Pianista Trail, which is highly popular with tourists, not only for its population of tropical birds and its breathtaking vistas, but also because the trail cuts through the region's famous cloud forests. These are dense woodlands, most of which are quite literally situated inside the cloud layer due to their altitude, which gives them an almost ethereal appearance. It is no wonder that this turned out to be Chris and Lizanna's first port of call. Unfortunately for them, it would also be their last. On the morning of the 1st of April, they were seen having brunch at around 10 AM with 2 other men, also Dutch nationals, whom they had befriended shortly after arriving in Boquete. This was the last time anyone decisively recalled seeing them. A few people told police that they thought they had seen them on the Pianista Trail later that day, but these reports were unconfirmed. In any case, they made a final post on Facebook stating their intention to walk around Boquete and then set off for the Mirador as soon as they had finished their meal. Along the way, they were accompanied by a dog named Blue, a household pet of the family they were lodging with. Timestamps on recovered photos, when matched by location, suggested that they made excellent time, and that they had arrived at the Continental Divide by 1 PM that afternoon. The pictures also indicated that the weather was bright and sunny, and views from the Mirador were clear and far-reaching. What was obvious was that the 2 women had dressed and packed relatively light, definitely not intending to take an extended hike. The first signs that something was up emerged later that evening, when Blue returned home by himself. Chris and Lizanna were nowhere to be seen. The next day, they failed to show up for a pre-booked appointment with a local tour guide, which raised further alarm within the community. Meanwhile, back in the Netherlands, the girls' families had stopped receiving text messages, which had been a daily occurrence up until that point. On the 3rd of April, residents from the town began a ground search for the 2 young women, whilst local authorities made aerial sweeps. The participation of local authorities is actually a point of contention amongst investigators. Whilst official search and rescue teams are adamant that their involvement began on the 3rd, many stakeholders, including townsfolk, flatly reject this claim, and instead state that they did not get involved until many days later, on the 6th. Coincidentally, this is also the date on which police detectives, dog teams and the girls' families arrived from the Netherlands to assist in the search. Despite the concerted effort by hundreds of people, as well as the offer of a $30,000 reward by family members, nobody found a single trace of the 2 young women. After 10 days, the official search came to an end, but many townspeople still took it upon themselves to continue looking. It was all to no avail. Chris and Lizanna had seemingly vanished into thin air. 10 weeks passed by, and long after all other searches had ceased, a member of the indigenous Ngobi tribe walked into Boquete carrying Lizanna's blue backpack and some of the girls' other belongings. She handed it in to the local police department, saying that she had found it on the bank of a river near her village of Alto Romero, It was close to a rice paddy where she had been working, and she indicated that it had not been there the day before. This suggested it had washed up on the riverbank sometime during the previous evening. When authorities checked the contents of the backpack, they found 2 pairs of sunglasses, a water bottle, $83 in cash, Lizanna's passport, her camera, 2 pairs of bras, and both women's mobile phones. Everything was dry, and the camera and phones were still in working order, somewhat contradicting the possibility that the backpack had been washed downstream. Authorities immediately began an extensive search of the area and located Chris's jean shorts about a mile upstream from where the backpack was discovered. Some people say that they were found zipped and neatly folded on top of a rock, whilst others contend that they were found floating in the river itself. One of Chris's empty boots was also located in the same area. If the discovery of clothing and apparel had been a reason to panic, nothing would prepare the families for what came next. Over the next 2 months, up to 33 bone fragments were found scattered over a small area, including a piece of Lizanna's pelvis as well as one of her boots with her foot bones still inside. Fragments of Chris's bones were also found relatively close by, along with those of 3 other unidentified individuals. This came as something of a shock to those close to the case, and suspicions of foul play began to weigh heavily on everyone's minds. In the meantime, police had been checking the contents of both the phones and the camera. It was discovered that between the dates of the 1st and 3rd of April, the girls had made a total of 7 failed attempts to call emergency services, the first call being placed only a few hours after they had reached the Mirador on the day of their hike at 16:39 in the afternoon. After the 3rd of April, the phones were only ever powered on to carry out signal checks. No further attempts to call emergency services were made. It is believed that Lizanna's phone ran out of battery on the 5th, as it was not turned on again after this date. On the 6th, Chris's phone was powered on, but the access pin was entered incorrectly for the first time. In fact, a total of 77 attempts to access the phone were made between the 7th and 10th of April, but all were unsuccessful. This phone was switched on again on the 11th for a signal check and was left active for just over an hour, before being switched off for the final time. The phones were not accessed again after this date. The most chilling aspect of the entire case, however, would be the 100 or so photographs that were found on Lizanna's camera. The first 11 images were ordinary enough. Taken on the 1st of April, they show the girls walking along the trail, taking selfies and generally enjoying the hike. But as the afternoon wore on, the last few of these images begin to exhibit a different mood. Pictures taken from behind Chris show her looking back at Lizanna with an uncertain expression. The camera was not used again from the 2nd to the 7th of April, but in the early hours of the 8th, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning, more than 90 photos were taken in complete darkness. Neither of the women are featured in these images, apart from a close-up of Chris's strawberry blonde hair with what looks like dried blood on her skin. What they do show are snapshots of the dark jungle interior, most of which are aimed at nothing in particular, although a few of them do seem to have a purpose in mind. Some show twigs and reflective materials laid out in deliberate patterns, others with plastic bags hooked onto branches. One is even believed to have been taken from the top of a ravine, looking down upon a body lying at the bottom, but it is far too dark to be conclusive, even after enhancement. All in all, the images add a somewhat bizarre element to the case, but unfortunately, they present far more questions than they do answers. So what happened to these 2 young women during the days after they went missing? The most prominent theory is that they took a wrong turn whilst on the Continental Divide, and instead of heading back down towards Boquete on the south side, they moved into the much deeper wilderness to the north. Once they realised they had become lost, they tried calling emergency services, but were unsuccessful. They probably continued moving downhill in this direction, hoping they would find their way out or stumble upon a settlement. But unknown to Chris and Lizanna, the only thing that awaited them was even more notoriously difficult terrain, with a lot of almost impassable ravines. It is believed that on the 5th of April, Chris suffered a terrible, perhaps even fatal, accident The fact that the person who tried to access her phone on the 6th did not know the PIN suggests that this was probably Lizana. Chris must have been either unconscious or dead at this point, otherwise she would have been able to just tell her friend what the PIN number was. There is a possibility that Lizana stayed with the dead or dying Chris for some time, not wanting to leave her alone. When she at last decided to move on, she placed markers indicating where Chris's body was located in case she made it out alive and had to guide rescuers back in to retrieve her body, and this was believed to be the purpose of the nighttime photos. Either that, or she was using the flash as a light source as she walked through the forest in darkness, which would have been highly dangerous. In any case, Lizana probably survived a few more days. This was supported by the fact that Chris's phone was powered on again on the 11th. However, she must have eventually succumbed to starvation or dehydration soon afterwards, or suffered an accident of her own. The bones found inside her boot indicated that she had broken her foot at some point, suggesting she had suffered a trip or fall. The bodies of the two women were then at the mercy of scavengers, and their remains were more than likely washed downstream towards El Toromero. Despite being a relatively plausible explanation, there are a number of issues with this theory. First of all, how could the girls have taken a wrong turn whilst on the Continental Divide? The north-facing slopes are much steeper than the south, and it would have been obvious that this was not the way they had come. Secondly, from the Mirador, the Pianista Trail is easily recognisable, and you can even see the town of Boquete lying in the valley below from this altitude, so why did they travel in the opposite direction? Could they have been forced into going this way? Foul play has never been ruled out of this case, and although evidence regarding their phone usage seems to contradict the involvement of a third party, there are other possibilities. A kidnapper would never have allowed the two women to keep hold of their phones, so it is unlikely that they were ever abducted. But what if they had been followed? According to an article published in 2016 by the Daily Beast, there is apparently a tour guide in Boquete who many locals suspect as having something to do with the deaths of the two women. He was not named, but it is known that he had met with Lizana and Chris less than 24 hours before they disappeared. He had offered them a full tour package, including a guided hike up to the Continental Divide, plus an overnight stay at his ranch on the other side of the mountains. For reasons known only to themselves, the girls declined his offer and decided to walk the Pianista Trail alone. This particular tour guide has a reputation in the town for being overly friendly towards female tourists. In fact, even some hikers who have visited the region mentioned on Reddit when discussing this case that this same tour guide had behaved inappropriately towards their own girlfriends, petting them and touching them. Could this man have taken Chris and Lizana's rejection as a slight? Could he have followed them up the Pianista Trail and have scared them into seeking another route down? After all, he was the one who first discovered their remains, and what's more, they were located less than half a mile from his ranch. And suspicions regarding a third party do not end there. When forensics examined Lizana's backpack, they discovered more than 30 sets of fingerprints on it. Whilst it is possible that the lady who found the bag may have passed it around her village before handing it in to police, this was never confirmed. Another unusual aspect is the lack of grease on the backpack and items of recovered clothing. As a body decomposes, grease evacuates the soft tissues and soaks into whatever the cadaver is wearing, and one would expect this to have been found on the girls' apparel if they had died as the result of an accident. There were also questions raised over the condition of some of the remains. Chris's bones looked as if they had been bleached, which was not in accordance with the rate of decay and seemed unlikely given the covering of the forest canopy. However, this depends entirely on where her bones were located. If they had been washed up on the bank of a river, for instance, which received more sunlight, it is not incomprehensible for them to have been bleached in the intense rays over a period of months. On the other hand, there were no markings on the bones whatsoever. If the bodies had fallen victim to scavengers after death, teeth marks and other minuscule abrasions would have been detected under a microscope, but there were none. The lack of any big bones is also troubling for many investigators. Why didn't they find any significant remains? as one of the most prominent guides in Boquete was quoted as saying, "There are no animals up there that would eat a skull, so where are the rest of Chris and Lizanna's bodies?" Other pertinent questions regarding the deletion of a picture on the camera also point to the possibility of something more sinister. Image 509, which sits in between the final daytime photo taken on the 1st and the first nighttime photo taken on the 8th, seem to be missing, but it's unclear whether this was deleted by one of the girls or another party later on, perhaps to hide something. It should come as no surprise that many people in the town suspect a cover-up. As tourism accounts for almost $4 billion a year, 18% of Panama's GDP, residents insist that the accident scenario has been overly pushed by local authorities rather than one involving foul play, in order to protect that income. Especially since the deaths of Chris and Lizanna, it is now believed that there may be a serial killer at large in the area. There have been up to 25 deaths and disappearances in the region which remain unsolved, 2/3 of which have occurred over the last 3 years. This makes one wonder who the other 3 individuals were whose remains were found along with the girls, but authorities simply explain this by saying that the terrain on that side of the divide is very dangerous. Even the indigenous peoples are wary of traversing that part of the region, and many have died crossing the monkey bridges which crisscross the ravines. There are many more theories out there, of course. Some believe the girls were eaten by pygmy cannibals, or killed for their organs by traffickers. Some even favour a supernatural explanation and have noted similarities with missing 411 cases. But as it stands, the deaths of Chris Kramers and Lizanna Frown were more than likely a tragic accident, although it seems that there are far too many questions hanging over this case to conclude this with any certainty. Too many bizarre elements, such as why Lizanna took those photos at night and not in the daytime. What was she trying to tell us? Was she simply trying to find her way in the dark, or possibly even scare off wild animals? Was she so sleep deprived and dehydrated by this time that she was possibly hallucinating? And was it even her who took the photographs at all? Unfortunately, we'll probably never know why Chris and Lizanna decided to pass over to the other side of the divide. Maybe they took a wrong turn, maybe they were forced, or maybe they just felt overconfident and wanted to explore further. Simply put, what we have here is a case of 2 young women getting lost in the jungle, desperately needing assistance and never receiving any. One can only imagine the fear and inner turmoil they must have felt, wandering through the untamed lands of a foreign country in the dead of night, starving and dehydrated, and panicking at every sound. And that is terrifying enough. The world has lost 2 more bright and beautiful human beings in Chris Kramers and Lizanna Frown. We can only wonder what they might be doing now, what they might have achieved in their lives, if only they had turned back towards Boquete on that fateful afternoon. Our hearts go out to their families. May they forever rest in peace.